If someone is above 60 or 70 right now and they're listening to this and maybe they haven't been well with their diet or they're working out at all. They're just kind of like living and a little obese and have some minor health challenges. What can they be doing right now if they're over 60 to try to live a better, healthier, longer life?
Well, let's pretend they're not over 60, but we'll go there. Let's pretend they're 35 or 40 and they're slightly or obese and have a couple number of health problems and, you know, they're all in the, you know, because we're all in this together. What are we going to tell this person? Here's what I'm going to tell them. I'm going to say, okay, the first thing that we need to focus on is metabolic correction. And we're going to do that by optimizing your protein. So you are you know, what are they? They're probably not eating a ton or maybe they're eating a lot of carbohydrates. I'm going to say, well, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to say, we are going to ideally, and again, they might not do this, 1 gram per pound ideal body weight, which if this person is 150 pounds, it would be 150 grams of protein. That is high, right? That is on the higher end. So this guy might be like, I don't want to do that. I'm going to say, you know what? That's fine. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on metabolic correction. So I am going to start you at 3 meals a day. I don't care when your first meal is, but that first meal after you are coming out of a fast is the most important. And you are going to optimize that for dietary protein.
Interesting.
And the reason it's the most important is because they are catabolic, they are fasting. At that moment, if we get that threshold, that nutrition, that protein threshold right, you will stimulate their muscle.
So what should be eating the first meal a day?
So that could be, I would want them to hit 40 to 50 grams of protein.
Really?
And that could be a whey protein shake, which you could probably get a little bit less. It could be a beef patty. It could be eggs. It could be chicken and eggs. It could be whatever.
Okay, 40, 50 grams of protein your first meal.
Just get that right. Just if the listener would do that for me.
No matter how big
no matter how big that's right.
40 to 50 grams. If you're 150 pounds or 250 pounds, just try to get in that range.
I mean, listen, could it be between 30 and 50? Yes.
Okay,
Between 30 and 50 would be great. If you are older, you know, if you are that 60 plus, you know, the muscle goes through a normal physiological change called anabolic resistance. You want to push their protein a little bit higher. If you are younger, like you could probably get away with 30 to 40 grams of protein.
Okay. Does it matter if you work out first in the morning or
I don't
fast for 5 hours in the morning? It doesn't matter. Just your first meal when you eat after you wake up.
Yeah.
Whether it's right away or 10 hours later.
Right. That first meal should be optimized for protein.
Okay.
And I would argue that if that meal is not around training, our target carbohydrate load, and if they're not training, would be 40 grams or less, that first meal. So you keep the carbohydrates lower that first meal. The reason is it ends up being about a 1-to-1 ratio of, you know, if
Carbs
they
the
want
same or less? Or you want less?
It would be less, right? Because anything really above the 50 grams of carbohydrates creates a more robust insulin response.
Spike, yeah.
And you don't want that for your first meal. You want that first meal to be very smooth and stable.
Okay.
And not only that, and Heather Leidy, who I had mentioned earlier, has done some very interesting fMRI research that, you know, one of the things that protein does is it's very satiating. And I always tell patients not to worry about their strengths, but to plan for their weaknesses. And when you augment willpower by leveraging dietary protein, you plan for it. You're much less likely to overeat.
Right.
So you nail that 40 grams of protein first, maybe a little bit lower carbs and some fat. Then that next meal is maybe 4 or 5 hours later, right? So you stimulate muscle. You now have robustly stimulated muscle. That next meal will be another, again, depending on what you need, I like to target around 30 grams at a minimum.
Protein.
Yeah.
Okay.
The data, you know, it's interesting. So a lot of the literature doesn't actually support much discussion on that lunch meal. It's really that first meal. And then, but again, if we're talking about maintaining healthy skeletal muscle, we're also talking about maintaining blood sugar, right? Compliance is really important. Protein, it's very hard to store protein as fat. There's a high thermic effect of food, meaning it takes more energy to utilize it. And part of the reason I believe is because it stimulates muscle. So it takes anywhere from 20% of the food that you eat, right, to actually, it takes 20% of that energy.
Right.
So if you're eating 100 calories of protein, there is some contribution to that.
Gotcha.
Then that last meal of the day, I would say I would make that more robust. Again, that 40 to 50 grams. And any listener could do this. The younger you are, you can, muscle is typically healthier. You can get away with a little bit less. The older you are, the more protein you need at once to overcome anabolic resistance. Skeletal muscle is fascinating, in case you were wondering what I really thought about it. It's actually a nutrient sensor. It senses our nutrients. And it senses leucine.
Senses
and that
what?
leucine, which is that
Yes.
that amino acid. And that's really how we need to think about protein is we really need to understand that protein requirement as we age is really about a meal threshold. 24-hour protein is very important. Secondarily, having protein in discrete meals is incredibly valuable. Because if you don't, you won't stimulate your tissue.
Sure.
And as you age, that tissue becomes more marbled with fat. It becomes more challenging. The other thing is resistance exercise is another way to stimulate tissue. And this is where you get with a great trainer. I know I typically recommend between 3 and 4 sessions of resistance exercise a week. But again, having someone evaluate you as it relates to training. And then another thing that's overlooked is mitochondria. And that's really the cardiovascular aspect. And the current recommendation is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous activity now. And I think again, we're very split. People are really into resistance training or they're really into cardio. But when we think about longevity, we must address both.
Is cardio, when I think of cardio, I think more about people trying to lose weight.
Right, that's not a great strategy.
Is it helping you build muscle when you
Not
are just
really.
running and riding a bike?
I mean, not really. Muscle to grow requires metabolic
Resistance.
stress, requires
Heavier
mechanical
lifting.
tension, exactly. Metabolic stress, ribosomal biogenesis, protein and calories.
Then why do people focus so much on cardio? Is it for heart health? Is it for other
Yes,
benefits?
I believe that number one, it's very easy to do. You don't have to have advanced knowledge of training
Machines
protocol.
and equipment.
And that's hard. That's hard for people. There's that barrier to entry. Cardiovascular, a lot of the literature, a lot of the data has always been done on cardio. Again, because it's easy. You first use rodent models, then you transition to humans. But cardiovascular activity is very valuable as it relates to mitochondrial function, as it relates to energy, and there's a natural decline as we age. Again, aging doesn't get easier,
Sure.
but being able to be strong and capable and optimizing for dietary protein will be the ultimate in longevity.
Yeah.
And there's so much confusion about the narrative that my fear is, when you address it in your later life, you're missing this huge opportunity midlife. Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, they don't develop later in life. They start in your 30s. When I was looking at that participant's brain, we'll just call her Sarah, when I was looking at Sarah's brain, it didn't start then. It started in her 30s.
From nutrition or
Yes.
from, wow.
From excess, from being overweight. Had she built muscle, it would have been a metabolic buffer.
Right.
When you look at diseases of aging, it's not the aging. These diseases like Alzheimer's, cardiovascular, these start in your 30s. Sarcopenia, which is the big one, where sarcopenia is loss of muscle mass and function, which is we see people get much smaller. That doesn't start then.
Right.
It starts much earlier. So if you eat the way that you did in your 20s, you have no chance of protecting your muscle. The changes will be subtle until one day they're not.
You just start shrinking and getting weaker. And
You have increase in adipose tissue. You now fall into the general category of one of the millions that are overweight, have high blood sugar, insulin resistance, you name it. And it's It's something that happens over time. And if we continue the conversation that is very distracted about, well, we'll take this and we'll take this and we'll do that, as opposed to do the foundational things that we have direct control over, which is train hard, optimize and prioritize for a protein forward plan. You do those fundamental things, everything else is gravy.
That's it. So if you focus on protein and you train consistently,
yes,
you should be
able to protect your muscle.
And it sounds like eliminate a lot of the health problems or risks that could come your way.
This is the ultimate in a muscle-centric approach.
Because you don't see a lot of people with muscle getting really sick.
Well, that's true. And if they did, their ability to survive, you can think of
and
muscle.
Recover, right?
Yes, muscle is the body armor. Muscle is an individual's body armor.
Right.
Whether an individual is plant-based or an individual is eating a high-protein diet, which I believe in because I've seen it for decades, and also it's in the literature, high-quality evidence in the literature, I believe that to be true.
Sure.
And what's happened now is
You're saying it's also hard to be a high-protein diet plant-based.